everyone. So I'm a director of research at Spotify. My team has data scientists, NLP, natural language processing researchers, and other types of researchers on the more qualitative and organizational side. I wanted to talk a little bit about algorithmic impact assessment. You probably see this come up a lot in more tech responsibility context, but I'm actually going to give some examples on how you can work through that context and make it think through, hey, how is my organization actually organized around this, structured? Do I have all the functions on board that I actually should have to make more conscious decisions about what my impact should be, whether it's business impact or organizational impact or more societal impact? First off, question everyone here in this room, who has ever done algorithmic impact assessments? Yay. We have one person. I would love to talk to you afterwards, obviously, to exchange experiences. So, all of you have a lot of work to do to try and figure out how to do algorithmic impact assessments, quite frankly, because you are not going to escape this. I know you're probably thinking, but there is another room about ethics and AI. Why are you talking about this? Well, quite frankly, you will have to start documenting and processing what you are doing to actually figure out what is my organizational approach here. You've probably seen all the headlines. There's new laws coming out in basically every type of market, not just the US, not just the EU. And obviously, we as a company also get headlines about responsibility. Hey, this is not new. Like, there's literature since at least '97 talking about algorithmic bias, wonderful work by Badja Freeman and Helen Nissenbaum. All of this is not new. But we don't have industry standards yet. There's not a handbook that you can nicely buy and go, okay, this is how I've fulfilled all the organizational requirements to be fine with this. So the thing here is, what did we actually learn while doing this with product teams and going, hey, what do you actually need to figure out what your algorithmic impact is, whether that is business and product impact or more responsibility impact? And I'll walk through 3 different types of examples. The first is the translation necessary for product and the domains. The second is the structuring. Do we even have the people on board, and how are they dividing up responsibilities? Do they know the questions to ask? And the third one, how do I create the space for iteration? And how do I create methods and tools and evaluations and update those? So the first one, the translation. Honestly, the biggest challenge is that right now there's all these different functions coming together. We have machine learning is pretty, like for a lot of companies by now, quite frankly, something that is core to the business, that's been built out. But that doesn't mean that everyone speaks that same language of how are we actually going to assess what the impact of all my big data science and machine learning engineering teams is. And how do I actually figure out what they're actually doing? And on the other hand, also, all right, you'll get pretty, in a way, sometimes as we get feedback from engineers, say, hey, that's a little bit naive how you think that data and machine learning work. So you need to do the translation work. So the first thing here is, obviously, any data set, any algorithmic outcome is biased in some way. It has characteristics. It's never a perfect representation of the world. So the question here is, are those characteristics based on decisions or non-decisions? And are you fine with that as an organization, to have non-decisions about impact? So you'll get some discussions, obviously. Some characteristics will be intentional. Release radar, new music. Women of rock, rock and women will be in that, and not necessarily hip hop or groups. So some characteristics, though, are unfair, so you have to make those decisions. There's tensions to be expected, so one thing here is, how do you actually manage those tensions in your organization? Whose job it is to deal with those tensions? Not just the technical side, not just the editorial side, but how do you do that translation? How do you manage those tensions? Also, hey, you make these decisions every day if you have a good product. For example, this is a year of music listening. Left January, right December. more or less acoustic music. Can someone tell me what that spike with that big arrow is? Exactly, Christmas. We are very unfair to Christmas music. We're also unfair to children's music, because if you would take exact representation of that, it's Christmas and kids' music all the time. You and your product make these decisions as well. You better have those in a conscious way so they're not just accidents. Same thing, who is actually going to figure out what your wider context is? This is worldwide music listening and who listens to whom and what the clusters are of basically different music cultures. This means that you have to actually have these different parts staffed, not just the technical side, but also the editorial side. So how are you going to find out if you're lacking some of that knowledge in that particular cluster? You need to have that translation as well. So this means that for algorithmic impact work, you need to staff different work streams. So there's first a research bit. Do I understand the domain? How are we even going to understand this domain, our products? The second is, how do we translate that understanding in product and tech impact? What are the tools and methods that we can develop? Oh, wait, we need to do organizational-wide education. Who is going to talk to your hundreds of squads, teams, machine learning engineers, editors, legal teams? What is the process for that? Because you can't just go out with, well, we handed everyone a course. I'm sure they watched it. That's not enough. You need to have an organizational structure to make this work. And then the third one is, for example, I'm standing here now. I am very happy to talk to folks. We need to have this external collaboration between different companies, between different research communities. How will we actually talk to each other and exchange experiences here? And it's not a linear process at all. We need to iterate between all these different work streams. So, you now know we need all these different work streams. How do you structure this? And again, this is really about using these examples of responsibility to go, how is the work around the machine learning actually structured in my organization? So first of all, you will get questions on the algorithm. Well, the algorithm doesn't exist. Like, I'm assuming that most of you, aren't most of you ML practitioners? Like, who is an ML practitioner? Who builds models? All right. So most of you will be like, there's not one model, there's all these data sets, there's all these models working on top of each other. Do you even know the dependencies between those? So especially if there are folks in the room who are thinking about tools, it's really hard to figure out what data sets build on which, what is the structure of that big stack of all sorts of models, and then who is responsible for something that may be a decade old, just holding stuff up there somewhere in the corner of that stack. But you won't get that question from teams who are not day-to-day working with data models. They'll just go, what does our algorithm do? So you'll have to really figure out how do we create that overview and the specifics. That means you need to have a shared framework and education and a view of what does the whole service do, and you need to complement that with very specific product areas. Like, our voice interactions will be very different, for example, in how things work than, let's say, you open the app and you have the home screen. So you need to start organizing with, okay, who in these particular product areas will help us figure this out? How do we cluster? Because we have hundreds of squads. How do we cluster those? Can we just look at existing product areas, or should we do that in a different way? And not just go, here's the information, but also who is the person who actually work with a central team, making sure that the whole company has a certain point of view, but then also have someone who can actually go, hey, that actually doesn't quite work out with what we're doing. You need to have people in place, roles and responsibilities figured out. That's a little different from, let's say, things like, how about we work in an agile way, and every 2 weeks in the sprint, we'll figure out what to do. So it's a little bit of an anti-pattern that you really have to figure out with teams after a decade of that really starting to be the way that things are working. This means you need to bake domain and expert decisions into the algorithmic lifecycle. In our case, we have algatorial as an approach, which is both personalized and editorial content. And you can think about how should that fit this larger algorithmic impact thinking. Like, how do we actually get the right people in the room when something happens? Can we do procedures to pull those people in the right time? Funnily enough, you can actually go back to tech history and go, hey, how did this work in the past? There used to be way more editors and data curators. For example, to the right, that's Connie. She was at Yahoo. She was there for years and years and years, and was one of the first surfers, where they actually went, hey, what is a high-quality Yahoo experience? These types of teams are absolutely wonderful to work with, because it's what's the quality of the data, what is the quality of the experience, what is our human point of view here? This used to be a very standard thing, and then we kind of shifted to, maybe we can automate everything. No, you cannot. So these types of histories are extremely useful to actually learn from. Then I have some bad news about existing tools. Good news and bad news. Good news, lots of amazing startups in this space actually starting to do tools, lots of corporate research labs also coming out with tools, also from academia. Problem. Not all of those will actually be applicable to, for example, recommendation systems. They may work very nicely for classifications, but not for ranking. So that means you'll have to dig through a whole bunch of tools and go, maybe at the end, oops, this one didn't work for us. So the amazing Brianna Richardson, who's a PhD student and was an intern, actually did a whole, okay, what question should you be asking yourself and your team whether a particular tool will work for this context? So again, this organizational idea of how do we evaluate this? And then the last part, creating space for iteration. This will not go right in one go. It will not be linear progress at all. So you need methods. So you need to find baselines. A very crude starting point may be, all right, can we compare what's recommended to what's being asked for? That's really imperfect, but you need to start somewhere to go, all right, what's our impact here? What are we actually doing? Can we compare something? And there's very different baselines you can pick with, okay, we divide up in groups. Is everyone equally recommended? Or, we actually look at particular baselines we have available. But you need to evaluate all those different baselines to go, hey, what are the downsides, upsides? Maybe we should have multiple ones of those. They're not obvious. There's no handbook for them. So as an example, about 1 in 5 streams, in some cases 1 in 4 streams, codes a female artist. That's not the same across every genre. You probably can't see exactly all the letters there, but if you, for example, go with the ones that have really high purple bar, which is mixed groups and female artists, that is, for example, in pop and R&B, that's much higher than in metal, which is absolutely, absolutely low. So there's all these intersections of, hey, how do genres, trends, and these types of representation questions actually intersect? But then, all of a sudden, it's the, hey, metadata. Who actually delivers the data so you can do these types of analyses? Who is responsible for making that data high quality? For example, this data is completely non-inclusive. It has no non-binary artists. Okay, you just cut out a whole group. So you need to dive a little bit deeper. So in that case, you can go, all right, let's do a sample. Okay, what's your sampling strategy? Who will do the labeling? Do you have reliable vendors to do this, or do you do this in your internal data curator team? Who sets the rules? Who makes sure that this is actually an inclusive process in itself as well? So in this case, did the labeling, interesting thing. Hey, at entry level, there's way more female artists than in the middle layer, but then some interesting spike at the end, which means that, hey, there's a lot of investment in very specific people and not the whole group. And that skews all of our high-level numbers as well. And again, this is not about the specific example, but really thinking through, if I want to do this in my org, who should do this? What do we need? And do we as an industry have those tools and people available to us? And then there's the question, did you even make it into the metadata at all? This is an example from one of my colleagues in the data curation team who sent me this. And the underlying thing is, It's a wonderful review of a concert in the 40s. It's absolutely gushing over how fantastic this was. And then the only thing that's in there is this lovely female vocalist. Well, she's lost to history. We have no idea who she was. We know she was really good. No idea what her name was. And this actually happens in other data sets as well. For example, when we looked at who is on Wikipedia, who's not, huge differences between genres, huge differences in language, not surprisingly, and also huge differences in gender. And again, investment in specific things, not everything. That means you're missing out on particular markets if you're using that data, missing particular demographics. You won't know them. So who are the people who are going to help you complement that data? This means, to summarize that whole process, if you want to have these types of methods to do evaluation, it's first scoping outcomes. What outcomes are we interested in from business impact or social impact? Do we even have methods and baselines? Can we evaluate those and actually implement them in the product? Or should we just monitor them and then who actually acts? It doesn't help if I just have a dashboard and no one actually ever looks at that dashboard. We need some action there. So to really summarize, you need to translate between these domains, create the space to actually have that organizational support, and make that structure and iterate on it. It will not be linear. You need to create the space. If your organization is not providing you with that space, go advocate for it and actually talk to others at other companies as well, and obviously very open to chatting with more of you. Thank you very much.